I like that. Hello, everybody. This is Debby Enoe. Welcome to another conversation on the challenges and triumph of online teaching during this pandemic at the Female Educators Roundtable. I've got another of my female educators guests, another person from around the world. Her teaching is very non-tradition as we have it, because we tend to think of teaching as doing the curriculum subjects, but we need to realize that teaching is outside of the box in terms of, it could be workshops, it could be a range of stuff. Some people teach music, some people teach dance. Those are all teaching subjects that you could teach. So she's going to introduce herself and tell us what she does, and we take it from there. Thank you very much. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you, Debbie. So my name's Vanessa, and as Debbie said, I teach non-traditional things in that I teach workshops rather than being in a single classroom with a single cohort of students every day, every week. I can see up to 1,000 students a week in my brick and mortar world. I teach outside on the River Thames, teaching archaeology and environment. I teach air pollution workshops. I teach at the British Museum, and I have my own company where I go into schools and teach history workshops as well. It's all very hands-on and active, which is quite different from doing this.
Yes. Thank you very much and welcome. Okay, would you like to share with us how you are actually now teaching those things that you normally teach in the building or outside or on the Thames, how you are now using this online platform to do that?
Well, so like this call, I know we're through Zoom initially, so I'm doing a lot of things through Zoom. And obviously I do have some of those technical issues that people come across, like the cat behind me comes in and joins in my lesson. Or the internet drops out, or if I'm using a virtual background to make one of my history workshops more engaging for my pupils, suddenly that drops out, or my internet couldn't handle it. I've upgraded my internet because of it.
Exactly.
So taking things online, but the thing about my previous workshops, sorry, cat, is that they were very hands-on. I take objects in. You can't hand someone an object through a computer screen, so finding an engaging way to have them interact with an object that they don't necessarily have at home is quite a challenge. Trying to bring that alive for them. Otherwise, they're just really going, oh, I might as well watch a documentary on TV. So it has to be a two-way engagement.
So how are you managing to do some of these workshops, in relationship to doing it online, and how are you able to do it to ensure that your audience or your students are very engaged? Before we move on, before you answer me, it just crossed my mind. What age group do you teach?
I teach everything from toddlers through to university students and families and adults as well. So I have a really broad student base. At the weekend before COVID, I could be taking a group down onto the Thames to teach them of the archaeology going on there, but it could be a group of postgraduates. So I have a really, really broad base in terms of my education background.
Okay. Okay, sorry, you did say that you teach toddlers. What do you teach them?
Most of toddlers. So this morning I was making butter with small children online. So that was messy play online.
Okay.
So teaching, where does butter come from? What goes into it? What does it feel like? And we turned cream into butter in a 30-minute online lesson.
Okay.
And Not just British students. I had a student from China and one from Africa.
Okay.
So
So because it is now being done online, that is the reason why you have such a range of students, isn't it, in terms of
yeah,
international
yeah.
cohort? Okay, okay.
In fact, I would say the least engagement in online is coming from the British audience.
Really? Explain.
Yeah. I think because at the moment British school is still in, and many children are still getting a lot of their educational provision by British teachers, whether it's asynchronous, whether it's a live lesson, whether it's worksheets being dropped off at home or they're collecting them from school. And of course, some year groups are in school here, but they're not engaged as much with the online platforms as the American students or the Chinese students, or those students whose parents are foreign nationals living in the Middle East. So I had a couple of students from Qatar the other day. So it is, the positive for me is it's allowing me to engage with new audiences and bringing together students that wouldn't be sitting in a classroom together. You're not going to get a child from Kenya and a child from China sitting in a classroom together in the brick and mortar world. But
Yeah.
online, I can introduce them and they can see, hey, we're all interested in this, learning. We're not so different after all. So the whole diversity and leveling of people, instead of us and them, it's we, which for me is an incredibly important aspect of this. And that's the part we need to make the most of and make into an opportunity.
It's interesting. You've said that, thank you for that. The interesting thing you've just said was the British children are not so engaged in the online platform. It's a fact, because I have been having conversation with educators from around the world, and all of them have been engaged in the online platform. In some cases, the education minister, where they have areas that the children are not able to access the resources, they've actually put the lessons on television. So there's a television channel that is used for academic work. So students who in rural areas, or students who do not have the access, the luxury of access of the computer or a laptop or a mobile phone, they actually had the lesson coming to them via the television station. And so far, I have not seen that in this country.
I have to say, because I mentioned to you before we went live, I'm from New Zealand, so I've been really up on what they did in New Zealand. And there's absolutely no population argument for, and I'm not blaming teachers because this isn't down to teachers.
Yeah,
The New
exactly,
Zealand
yeah.
government took their Easter holidays 2 weeks earlier than normal, than they were meant to be. They then, during those 2 weeks, put a program in place for a nationwide education scheme. They rolled out within those 2 weeks laptops and devices for children that didn't have them at home, internet for children that didn't have them at home. And those then went to the schools afterwards. It got to June here and schools still didn't have that provision. So, you know, the organization, and this is not because of a smaller population, they made that provision, they made it a priority. And I think the British government didn't do enough to put things like that in place in terms of education. It was just left up to the individual schools.
Yes.
And they did their best. And I am not knocking any teacher in this country that tried their hardest in any way, but they were left floundering. They weren't given advice at the right time. They weren't given solid advice. Whereas I look at what was happening in New Zealand, and I have family who are educators there as well as friends with kids in the education system. And they were telling me, well, this is happening and this is happening. And the government said this. And the government just didn't say it and waffle it. The government acted on it.
Yeah. It is very true, because even I had a Philippine educator, I think it was 2 weeks ago, and she had said to me that children or family who did not have internet access, the government actually had an arrangement with an internet provider to provide free access for those families who could not afford this, who could not afford to pay for internet access. And that was fantastic. As you rightly say, we as educators in this country, the schools and the colleges and the university, they were all left to their own devices individually to decide how they're going to go forward. Hence the reason why you had some schools had a very good program in terms of the online platform. Some had none at all.
But some, I don't blame the ones that had none at all, because some, even if they'd gone to the effort to create an online platform, they wouldn't have had student engagement. So where I live in London, in Tower Hamlets, there's lots of children that don't have that online access.
Mm-hmm.
So why would a school put all that effort into creating that online platform and the extra stress on teachers learning the new skill when their students can't engage with it?
Exactly. That is very, very true, because there was no other way for them to access it, because the government haven't said, okay, I've made an arrangement with O2, 3 or whatever, so that parents who don't have internet access, who cannot afford internet, you know, that they've actually have a way to actually get it. And I've spoken to so many educators who say that the government have had an arrangement with the internet provider to provide free internet access.
Yeah.
To allow some families who cannot ordinarily afford the internet to have the internet provided free at certain times. And in some cases, it meant that, you know, either on WhatsApp, they were just able to give the homework or give some work, but they had some form of access.
Yeah. And I have to say, the amount that the government here has finally and shambolically provided does not meet the needs. And they had the figures here. They have free school dinner schedules. They know what that's like in each area. But there's high schools that might have 100 kids on free school dinners that have only got 10 laptops to hand out amongst the entire population. They just have really let everybody down and left people floundering, and it wasn't the fault of the teachers or the head teachers.
Nope,
I totally agree. Guidance.
Yeah,
the lack of guidance.
Yeah, because you see, when you had some teachers are saying to me that in their country, you know, everybody had access to, you know, some form of education because the government makes sure that they had a television channel, which they actually put, you know, the information on. So there were no excuse. It doesn't matter the amount, but they all had something. And that's the sad thing here in terms of what the students are able to access, because some students are able to access very little.
Absolutely. And there were opportunities there that were completely missed. There were real opportunities that were missed. And, you know, people like me, we would have been missed from that anyway, but children wouldn't have been left floundering the way they were. Families would have had structure. Well done to the Oak Academy people that got themselves together and got themselves organized. It doesn't fit everybody's curriculum, but they did something. The government later took credit for that, which just seems to be the way of things. But, you know, teachers were left on their own. So it's really been a difficult thing. And many, particularly primary schools, don't have on-site technology technicians. So although they have a group which is a bit different from me, I'm my own technology technician, so my learning curve has been incredibly steep, but I'm at an advantage in some of that, in that until things changed at the museum, I was delivering for Samsung Digital at the British Museum. So I'm not scared of technology. I haven't got that fear, which I know is something you discussed on one of your conversations, is for the more mature teacher, those of us that are no longer in our 20s, the fear of technology. But the moment you step back from it, it just moves so fast. So I haven't taught for Samsung Digital for 12 months and the technology is changing. So I'm trying to play catch up, because if I'm not using it in my everyday life, I need to refresh those skills. And, you know, there's new apps coming on. I taught myself green screening at the beginning. Like I do screen before, but not in my bedroom. I hadn't had a green screen in my bedroom before. And I needed a different format to be using to create the video that I created. So I reached out to some of my audiences with a documentary on Maya timelines, because that's one of my specialist areas. I go out and do Maya archaeology, and I teach Maya workshops. But I know that teachers in the UK struggle. So I put together a timeline video activity that ended up being half an hour long, longer than I wanted, but it compares the Maya with what's going on in England at the same time. And it does cover 3,000 years. So, you know, I took this challenge and in my bedroom created a green screen, then took it onto a brand new app or a brand new program that I taught myself and created a video. That was time consuming, but I was trying to get my teaching out there to a wider audience to allow people to access it in a way that was beneficial to them. So,
okay, thank you for that. So the other thing is, you say you teach archaeology, you teach, you know, let's say, you know, on the Thames, etc. So there is no way you could actually bring that on the online platform, right?
Well,
I'm asking question. I'm not sure. So you need to tell me.
I have brought it onto the online platform.
Tell us.
Conversation. Another experience in video.
Okay.
So to teach what I teach, I usually teach it through a charity, but I have a license to go down and do what's called mudlarking. That's picking up things off the Thames. You have to be licensed to do it, but you can pick up objects. You can pick up objects and you can bring them home. So this is a shoe that's about 150 years old. Now, see, with the activities we do there, it's about finding the object.
Right.
So I went down once I was allowed back down because the foreshore was closed for safety reasons during the tight parts of lockdown and has only been open a few weeks. So I went down and I videoed finding objects. And I've put that into an online class. And I've made it into a bit of a competition. So I have my students and they compete against each other and me, because once I've found the object, I zoom in on it. So they have to call out and tell me if they've spotted the object before I zoom in.
So you kind of make the whole situation, the whole experience as live as possible, as if they were actually going down to the Thames with you to find these objects.
Yeah, so it's trying to bring that excitement to the online, because I don't want to be just sitting there talking at the students. They're going to switch off. They're not going to engage. And then actually the shoe is one of the objects that I use. So when they've found it, I have a second camera set up. So I switch between the video and my other camera so that we can actually look at the object closely. And they can look at it and see, yes, it's real. What is it? And then we can talk about it the way that we would if we were actually live. So they can't pick it up and touch it, but they've had some excitement trying to find it.
Yeah, exactly. You have to feel the excitement and not the way. So this is actually demonstrating you have to be really, really, really innovative to think really outside the box as to what is going to engage the students so that it is close to live as possible.
Yeah. And then I had to teach myself how to make PNG images, you know, those images that you can't see a background, so it's just the cutout shape. And we're going to do some object sorting and some moving things around so that they can do a bit more engagement, which again is something that I would do live, and it took a lot of thinking. to make that into an online activity and some new skills. But
Yeah.
I couldn't go live with the lesson until I felt that it was engaging. So I think what people that aren't teachers don't understand is the amount of background that goes into creating something. And there's more background that goes into creating it online than there is to creating it live. Because if I create it live, yes, I've created some resources, but I don't need to go down and film and then splice my films together and make sure they'll work and that they're of a high enough quality. I don't need to make PNGs. I've got objects. And I've already got the object. You know, if I have a live student, I can just hand them the object that I have in my hand. Online, I have to make something that they can move and link to make them feel engaged, because they don't want to sit and watch me do it. That would be boring.
Exactly. So it means that you're constantly thinking engagement.
Yeah. And the learning goals are there. So that's a history learning goal. It's learning about the history of London through the River Thames.
Right.
So that is there, but you have to engage. And it is constantly thinking the engagement.
You know, the interesting thing about it is when we now move over to the online platform, as you said just now, to plan an hour's lesson, it is a 3 or 4 hour preparation.
Well, that's kind of a 3 or 4 day preparation by the time I get the tides right, go down and film.
Exactly. And that's just for one lesson.
Yeah.
Because it's a situation where we have to think so much out of the box, especially coming online. Because as you rightly identify, you could actually say to a student, if you're in the brick and mortar building, here you are, touch this so you feel the texture. Now you have to say, okay, you have to imagine feeling the texture.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of showing them the object. So therefore, from seeing the objects, they have this imagination as to what it is likely to be.
But you have to, because a book shows them the object. So why aren't they just turning to a book? You need to make it more than what they can see by looking at a page in a book. And that is the key, because I could just say, go and read that book. And they might or they might not. But if they come on to one of my lessons, then I need to make sure they're not going to be switched off because they could just read that in a book.
Yeah. It's so very true, because that's one of the reasons why some lecturers, when they actually lecture in university, they lose the student, to opposed to some lecturers that are engaging in university. I say to students all the time in my lectures, there is no way you're going to be sleeping because my voice projects, and I'm looking at you, right? And I have to make sure that you are engaged.
Yeah, I had a philosophy lecturer when I was in university that didn't take that on board, and it didn't matter. I could sit one seat away from him and he just droned, and his lessons weren't very exciting, and everything he wrote was on a printout.
Yeah.
And he just switched me off as a learner. And if that switches me off as a learner who's engaged in my own learning and wanting to learn, then you can't do that on an online platform, because you don't know, are the kids there because their parents signed them up to do this? Have they been told they have to do it? So they turn their screen off, which is a big thing, particularly when you're dealing with teenagers. We don't want to be seen, so they turn their screen off. So having something for them to do, you can actually gauge their engagement. So one of the apps that I'm using is called Nearpod, which is an online learning tool, and it's an interactive tool. I can set it up so they can write on the screen simultaneously. I can set it up so that they can draw on their screen, and so each child has access to the screen and they're drawing on their independent screen. but I can look at what they're drawing.
Okay.
And then I can share it back to everybody else.
Okay.
So, it's steep learning curve because I had to find out about this, which isn't something that I need in the brick and mortar world, and learn it and then apply it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then, you've seen my housemates, the furry ones.
Yes.
They're no good for trialing my lesson.
Yes.
So I have to find some way to trial my lesson to make sure it works before it goes live for a learner.
Yeah.
So my family are often victims.
Yes. I see that because there's sometimes we need to practice because this is not something we used to. However, if we don't have any willing participant, that sometimes I don't have them because they're refusing to sit for them to be the people of my lesson. I just have to go with it and just modify as I go along.
That's the same thing. And I guess because I'm not in a classroom, I don't have the same cohort every day, I can do that. So as much as there's a massive input into creating a lesson, I am able to repeat it.
Yes.
So that is an advantage for me as a workshop educator, is that as a classroom teacher, I would teach basically the same lesson year in, year out, but every time you teach it, you would teach it differently.
Exactly. You have to tweak it. Yeah.
You have to tweak it, and it's the same. So I have the framework for my lesson as an online educator, and the major resources, which took a lot of time to create, have been made. But I just tweak it through the teacher talk and the engagement with the students. And if I find something doesn't work, throw it out and start from scratch again. Just that bit. You don't have to mothball the whole thing. So luckily, it is for the first time, we're reinventing our lessons again. So, our going down onto the foreshore to do archaeology, we're reinventing again, but we're not necessarily doing that the next time I teach it.
Right. Yeah. I see that.
So that's where I differ a little from a classroom teacher.
Okay, thanks. Another thing is, have you had students who have not been engaged, not or refusing to turn on the cameras?
I had one today that preferred her camera off. So she would unmute to ask me a question. She did I had to ask her at the beginning of the class for safeguarding reasons to turn the camera on, so I could see that it was a child at the other end, not an adult at the other end. So, we do have those safeguarding practices in place. You have to be able to verify that your student is a child. If they're not, then you can move them out either to a breakout room and say, okay, you don't want to turn your camera on in front of everybody. Can you turn it on so I can just see it and verify who you are? And then we can go back into the classroom. And if they still refuse, then you can take them out and have them leave the meeting. So safeguarding is vital, and being aware of how to do that and having practices set up of how to do that in an online platform. But she was happy to push her space bar. We were cooking, so she'd push her space bar. And at the end, I knew she'd produced because she showed me.
Okay.
She showed me at the end what she'd produced.
Right.
So she had been engaged the whole way.
Right.
But I am aware of other online educators working in a non-classroom based situation that do have those problems, and particularly with teenagers.
Yes. Because they don't want to be seen, the hair is not right, the face isn't right. You have the whole shebang.
Come be an archaeologist, it doesn't matter.
Exactly, isn't it? That's the thing about it. You said one of the things you did this morning was cooking. So how did you do your cooking?
Okay, so I had 3 devices set up in my kitchen. I have a benchtop camera, which is set up as an extension of my laptop, and I just changed the camera options on Zoom. So I actually have 3 camera options on Zoom at the moment. Then's my laptop that had my PowerPoint that I was sharing because we had a recipe. And then I had a third device where I could see all my participants. So it was logged in. Yeah, so that I could see I had 4 pupils today. So I could see them all and follow along. And it was a follow along. So we were cooking together. So I would demonstrate, they would join in.
Okay.
So yeah, start to finish. And the one I did this morning when we were doing messy play that I was mentioning earlier, the same thing, just with today was a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. That class goes down to 4. So we talked. So we were screening like this to start with. Then I shared my screen to ask them questions. And then I went back to a camera where they could see a my bowl. I had them on the screen and we just made it together. We got messy together.
Okay.
I got less messy than they did.
Okay. So when they actually did that, do you have adults present with the 5-year-olds?
Off to the side. The adults aren't supposed to be on the screen.
Okay.
But we do ask that the adults are present. So you're not going to leave a 5-year-old in a room on their own, with a stranger. So mum was off the screen, but he was joining in. And so, yeah, that's how we did that.
Okay. In terms of safeguarding issues as well, the fact that the adults had to be present.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So what other things that you do, that you have been doing online, which you would normally do in the classroom?
I've been taking storytelling online.
Okay.
So I'm with a friend who's another museum teacher. We've been focusing on Neolithic stories to make history come alive, where I get dressed up in an authentic Neolithic costume.
Okay. So you enact in this story as you will do in the classroom.
Yes, I will in the classroom. So, one of the things I do is I'm a storyteller. And to bring that back to the curriculum, I have artifacts, objects. So I tell the story and then there's a question and answer session at the end of the story, or my partner tells the story. And because I'm the one with the costume, I'm dressed up and I do the question and answer. And we talk about the objects that have come up in the story.
Right.
And, how they're made, what they're made of, what they're used for. And it gives children something to hang history on. So they know it's a story, but then because they're saying, so this is an example, I'm still working on this one, still making this one. It's a knife.
Okay.
So from the Bronze Age, made from a piece of rib bone.
Okay.
So yeah, they can see me how I'd use it. They can talk about how I'd make it. I have my grindstone, so I can actually demonstrate that this is what I'm doing to make it. Right. And then they have a story, so I'm not lecturing at them for an hour. They've got a story. We try and make it interactive. So if last story was the turnip, and so they were pulling and they were helping tell the story by who was there. The next story is the deer that lost his antler, so there'll be some call and repeat aspects to it. So yeah, it just gets them involved, so they're not just sitting passively at the screen. We want them to be engaged, and it is quite hard because if they're sitting at a screen with some headphones, now I've got Wi-Fi headphones or Bluetooth headphones, but if they're sitting attached to the screen, that does make it a bit harder for them to get involved. So, you got to get them running, running, looking over. It's got to be a real story that gives them something that the TV can't.
Yeah.
And the TV can't answer questions about life in the Neolithic.
Yeah.
And that's one of my problems, the cat walking through.
That's one of the challenges, or one of the trials, however you want to look at it, of being on the online platform. That sometimes we will have the children running across in the back, or we have the children tugging at the parents. But this all is part and parcel of the online platform. Yes,
Well, I'll tell you the funny story that I mentioned before that I said will probably come up in our conversation.
oh yes.
Last night I was doing a social skills class, but it's a storytelling class, but we spin. So we spin, we turn fiber into thread. So it's an active skills class. It's learning about the past because we're learning how to do a traditional craft. Yeah. And the women in the past would have sat and spun, and the men. There were definitely cultures where men spun, and they would have exchanged stories. So I'm busy spinning and telling a story. And Madam, who just walked past, told me it was time for dinner. She came and sat on my lap and chewed on the string.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Exactly. So the cat is just like a child.
Just like
the attention, you just have to give it. It doesn't matter what you're doing, how you're doing it. Attention is needed, so I need it now. You have it.
Dinner time usually.
Exactly. And as I was saying earlier, that's what I had in relationship to the children. When they're ready for their mother, because it was, female educators, they actually come either drag the mother or went in the back or the front of the screen. So therefore, these are cues. Time to leave.
Well, I don't think you've had any children chewing on the objects that your mothers are trying to educate.
Exactly. Not quite.
She climbed on my lap because, I spin anyway. And when I spin, I'm used to one of the cats sitting on me.
Okay.
They will sit, not usually this one, the other one, the one that was on my lap to start with, will sit on the edge of my lap and I will spin. And normally they leave things alone.
Yes. But that day, nothing was going to be left. I need to chew.
I need to chew. You haven't given me my dinner.
Exactly. So therefore, I'm using that as a substitute.
I'm going to get involved. So, these are the challenges, and especially like teaching a craft like that. So I teach spinning and cordage, so making rope.
Okay.
This one's made from nettles.
Oh, right. Okay.
So, yeah, all sorts of things going on. It's great time for nettles at the moment for harvesting nettles for cordage. So ancient skills, but you need to I have the second camera set up so that they could see what's going on. But you can't reach over and direct a student, fix something for a student. That's something you can't do online.
Yeah.
So having really clear instructions and, well, hold on, go back a step, try it this way.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Another thing is, do you find that online you have to be, in terms of instruction, you have to give specific and one small part of instruction?
Yeah. And particularly, so this morning with the cooking, with the baking rather than the butter making, we just did one step at a time. And I've got students all over the world working at slightly different speeds. Some that would have all of their ingredients sitting on the bench, which if we were doing this, because I used to teach gardening club and cooking was part of that when I was in a classroom, I would have all the ingredients out ready for the kids.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And so if you're teaching a student that hasn't got everything out in advance, even though you've sent them a list of what they need, they're running off to get something, and someone else has already measured it out and it's in their pot. So you've got to wait and keep the chat up so that they're not getting disengaged by it. Also, if I was teaching in a classroom, I could guarantee the ingredients that were going to be used, the materials, whether it's DT, whether it's ancient craft, whether it's cooking. I know exactly what's there because I've been and bought it and I've provided it. So last week when I was teaching the cooking class I taught today, the student comes on and it was using tapioca flour and he had plain flour. So it's different. And, you know, a 10-year-old doesn't know the difference between plain flour and tapioca flour. I do. So on the spot, I had to change my lesson plan in my head and be completely open and frank with them and say, okay, I think I can make it work, but we are having an experiment here. And are you okay to roll with me with that? I'm not making any guarantees about the flavor that's going to come out because we're experimenting. It should be all right. And so we experimented together, but you know, you don't have the same control that you have when you've got your students there in person. Especially over things like materials. You can't say, here's the materials. There's the right measuring cup. We're all working in centigrade today. I've got half of my students in centigrade, half of them in Fahrenheit.
Exactly. So therefore, it's a way to convert to make sure that everybody have the same weight, you know, the same amounts.
The same temperatures. Luckily, I'm going for things that don't require grams or ounces. I'm going for a cup of this and a cup of that because if you're using that, that's translatable. If your cups are slightly different size, it doesn't matter because your ratios are still the same.
Yes.
But, you know, in a cooking lesson, and it takes 20 minutes for these to cook, you have to fill those 20 minutes. Whereas if you were in a brick and mortars classroom, you might say, okay, we're going to have a break, or we're going to do a maths test or a spelling test. That's how we're going to fill this 20 minutes.
Or tidy up. Let's tidy up.
Tidy up doesn't take 20 minutes when you're at home.
That's true. That's very true. But in the classroom, it would probably take 20 minutes because they're talking to their friends, they're standing there. So it's like a constant.
And they make more mess in the classroom because there's so many of them. Whereas at their home, they don't make as much mess. And the adults are standing nearby going, don't you make a mess in my kitchen.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the offside as well, isn't it? So what do you do to fill this 20 minutes?
So we do start by, we do a tidy up. So kind of 5 or 10 minutes. And then I give them some history because tapioca flour is something that some of them haven't come across before. So where does it come from? Or if they've had it before, do they know that it comes from Brazil? Do they know what the plant looks like? What part of the plant do you eat? And then I'll do some, if we're cooking, we like to change things and make variations. So how would you change this recipe? We haven't tried it yet, but what else could you do to make this recipe different? And if we're really stuck for time, I do some maths challenges.
Okay.
The recipe I've worked out does 8.
Okay.
So what if we're going to a party and we want 24? They're only tiny. I can probably sit and eat 8. I don't. I restrain myself, but you know.
Exactly. Yes.
If we're going to a party and we want 24, how are we going to make this? So we do the maths and what the differences are, and it uses 1 egg. What if we only want 4? Can we do that if we're using 1 egg? Now I had a student today that said, yes, I've got vegan eggs, so I only mix up.
Oh my goodness.
That's fine, but most of us are using like regular chicken and duck eggs.
Exactly, isn't it? Exactly. So where did you get vegan eggs from?
Apparently it's a powder, and I guess you get them. Yeah, I guess you get them from specialist food shops.
I've never heard vegan eggs.
Well, you can use arrowroot to thicken things. So
exactly.
It's not something I've come across before, but you know, this is a gluten-free recipe, so I was expecting for vegans and other people with maybe dairy intolerances to come into this class. I mean, it's kind of a bit different from what I usually teach, but it's not something I haven't taught. Like I say, I used to teach cooking with my gardening club.
Right, yeah.
So I'm just bringing in, because the other disadvantage of being a freelance teacher like me is from the 10th of March, which is the day I walked into a school and they said, we're not having visitors, go away.
Right.
That's when my work stopped.
Right, yes.
So I've had to figure out how to have an income stream.
Yes, think outside the box.
Have to think outside the box. So, going and teaching online, I do have to charge for it, but it's a way forward. And I'm having these amazing experiences as an educator because I'm bringing students from so many parts of the world together. And in context of what's happened recently with the Black Lives Matter movement, I think that is so important.
Yeah. It's interesting because it meant that you could only bring students from around the world together on an online platform. There is no way you could have had that. They could have had that experience. No, you could have had that experience in the brick and mortar setup. So,
I mean, I have to a degree because when I was working in Central America in Belize, doing archaeological field schools, and so that's university level, we would have students from different parts of the world come and join us. But they're university level students.
Exactly, yeah.
They're not primary school students. A 5-year-old living in China having a lesson with an English student living in Kenya.
Exactly.
Those experiences, in the broader context, I think this is the value of this time and this kind of teaching.
Yes.
It means we value other people. Not everybody looks like us.
Yeah.
Not everybody sounds like us, but we're all interested in things. We have a common ground to come together. Yes. And as a species, we need to capitalize on this. Yes. We need to make more of our commonalities rather than our differences in terms of getting along together and sharing the planet. Yeah,
that's very true. And the interesting thing about, thanks for that point, because I'm now going to connect, because the interesting thing of me actually doing this online platform, I've actually had the opportunity to interact with so many educators. Although we are from different parts of the world, we still have so many things in common. We have more in common than what we have in difference, which is so interesting in terms of educators, because we were all singing the same story, the same story of the challenges of non-engagement of teenagers.
Yeah.
Of reluctant engagement of teenagers, of having to differentiate in terms of when the teenagers are deciding that they're not going to come on the platform, when they know the lesson starts at 10 in the morning, educators are saying, okay, in order for me to get my teenage students, I am going to start running my lesson at 7 p.m. in the evening. So it really is.
I mean, some of that with the teenagers could be competition within the home as well. Like if you've got 3 kids and 2 adults trying to work from home and trying to learn from home, and you've only got 1 or 2 devices, who gets priority? Who gets access? When do they get access?
That's very true. That's very, very true. So it's a matter of negotiating when can this child, have access to this platform.
Yeah. And as educators, maybe being a bit flexible. So my earliest class I teach at the moment is 9 a.m., which tends to be, it can be English students, haven't had any yet. So it tends to be Asia and the Arabian Peninsula. And I have a class coming up that's going to be at 9 o'clock at night. And that's going to be kids from California.
Okay.
So it extends my day. I'm not going to teach straight through from 9 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, because that's when that class is going to finish. That's silly. I have to pace myself. And I think we too, as educators, need to think about that.
Yes.
We can't burn ourselves out.
Self-care, self-care, self-care. That's something educators, this week I was meant to do a challenge on self-care. And because I was so busy, I'm going to try to do that next week. Because educators are forgetting the word self-care.
Yeah. And it can be, when I was going out in the brick and mortar world, I would cycle to where, well, depending on what I was doing. If I was teaching up in the other end of England, I'd have to drive up there. But if I was teaching in central London, I would cycle to my teaching location. I would be on my feet teaching all day, and then I would run home. Now, my classroom is either in my kitchen or in my lounge. I'm in central London. My flat's not very big. I have to actually think about leaving the house. I have to think, I must take a break and I must go outside. Wet and rainy and nasty today. Really hard to go for a run when it's like that. But if I'm in a museum and I have to get home and it's snowing, I still run home. But when I'm nice and warm at home, it's harder to go out.
It is. I'm having the same challenge, because you're thinking, I looked at outside, I think, I have not been out all day. And I'm saying, oh my goodness, I should go outside. But I'm looking outside, and the process of having to put on a coat, all of that, it's a lot.
Yeah, I did go out. I went out because yesterday I forgot to buy cat food.
Okay, so you had to go out.
I was going to be in big trouble.
Exactly. Whereas for me, I didn't deem it necessary to go out because the weather was horrible. So in terms of me actually exchanging the air, I wasn't able to get the air from outside, although the windows are open, etc. But nothing be going outside. So therefore, in terms of, me going outside, today wasn't practical. But at the same time, I know that I had to do things that would engage me in terms of circulating the air, etc. Like
get the body moving.
Exactly. I had to, because it is essential. That's part of my self-care routine. And it is sad because I had a lot of educators are saying to me that they have been on the online platform and have forgotten to get off and take a break and have a meal. And I find that quite frustrating, because we do this when we're in the classroom. We should no longer do that while we have full control.
Well, I have to say, as a freelance educator, I will teach all day, I will come home, and I'm often creating resources just like a classroom educator. My work doesn't end, whether I'm communicating with teachers in the brick and mortar world, whether I'm creating a new resource, whether it's something physical, or whether it's a computer resource, they all take time to create. And so as a freelancer, self-care is something that we are exceptionally bad at. And you think, we leave our classroom, we're not taking marking home, but there's so many other things. If I'm delivering, say, a Maya workshop, I have materials, so I've got to load and unload the car and bring I have rocks. I have rocks. I have 20 kgs of rocks that I carry for my workshop. And that's only one part of my workshop. So we're not very good at that anyway. And I injured myself during lockdown, so I actually got out of the habit. And that's one reason I keep some of the museum work I do, is because when I go to those museums, I'm not in my car. And actually the running and the cycling to get there and home is part of that self-care. And it's getting me outside. But you know,
go ahead.
I was going to say, going to a classroom, going into school, going into where you're lecturing, you leave the house. And I don't know about you, but I actually live alone. So I can actually go days without human physical interaction.
Yeah, yeah.
The online platform works, but I've only got these guys.
To have conversation with, the interaction with.
She has big conversations. She tells me what she thinks.
So you are able to have a dialogue.
No, it's more first person imperatives.
Right. You know, it's something you said which is so interesting. As educators, we are bad at taking care of ourselves.
Yeah.
And this is something that has to change, because if we do not take care of ourselves, we will not be in the space to support our students, because what we are bringing to our students is the negative and tired energy which we've got because we have not got rid of that.
Yeah.
So when an educator is shouting at a student and the student says, well, I haven't done anything, and I have to reassure the student, you need to look at it. It may not be you. That teacher would have probably is tired. And that teacher also needs to acknowledge where they're at. And when they're tired, to know that I need to come off and take some time out, because it is not beneficial to your students, because you are not progressing.
But in the education system, teachers have to be machines or they are penalized. It's not as much as it's expecting educators to teach children about self-care and to care for the students. There isn't actually a lot of care for the educator themselves from the bureaucracy, from the system in which they work. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's why I left classroom teaching.
As much as I hear that, my thing to teachers as well always is, I hear that, but we need to take it.
Yes.
At whatever cost. We need to take it.
I can say I took it by stepping out of a formal classroom into an informal education role.
Yes, that's an alternative. But you see, for some educators, that would be a drastic take, right? And I'm saying to say,
it was scary.
I see that.
It was scary. It was hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and we encourage our students to do things that are scary and hard.
Yeah, that's true.
But
that's true.
You know, change isn't bad.
Yeah.
But we also acknowledge that as educators, we're scared as well. We're scared of insecurity. We're scared of not being able to pay the bills.
Yeah. But then sometimes we have to feel the fear and the scaredness and make the changes, because from whatever you do in terms of change is a must.
Yeah.
And from change come development. That's what I've said to educators. If you do not want to leave the classroom, you need to take time off for you, because when you're going to your student, you are going to your student in a place of tiredness, frustration, and anger. And what you would get in return is a set of students whose behavior replicate your behavior pattern. And there would be nothing done. You know, another thing I say to educators just before the lockdown, because I was doing a workshop, and I said to them that when there should be no reason why you should be looking at your emails when you're at home. Hell no, that's your time. There's no point in you looking at that email when you could do very little about it. You are off sick. You know, I had an educator off sick, and she's saying to me, oh, yes, Debbie, I was off sick, but I had to look at the email. Why? What can you do from that point? Nothing. So there is no point in you being off sick and looking at the email. Because you see, the situation we now have, it become an expectation of educators. So we actually start repeating the cycle.
Yeah.
And we need to stop the repetition of this cycle. Because we would never be fully taking care of ourselves if we constantly repeat the cycle. Because then you have the situation, look, this educator is burnt out. They're not interested in why you're burnt out. They're looking at it, this educator is burnt out, she's frustrated, she's just told off the student, and on it goes. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to come from a place of self-care and self-love. Because
it does feel a bit like the bureaucracy views educators as disposable.
Exactly. And we need to stop wearing that program.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it needs to start from, because when I leave the classroom, I'm not saying I'm not preparing my lessons at home. I am preparing my lessons at home, but I'm not looking at any emails. When I get to the school, they could have, there's sometimes when I open my email, you would have, sometimes I see 100 and something, 50, whatever. I'm not looking at all of them.
No.
I'm only looking at those that I feel is humanly possible. I've gone into meetings and I'm told, oh, you haven't looked at the email. No, I have not seen the email. Oh, but you know, your team, I hear that. I have not looked at the email. There are too many emails. So we need to start making decisions, or else you're going to have the situation where educators are constantly burnt out. Hence the reason why we have educators leaving education in large quantities. Why? Because they're burnt out.
And they feel underappreciated.
That's another factor.
That's another side of it.
You see, you could only be appreciated when you give that out. If you're giving out that, you know, it is okay for everybody to ask you things and, you know, you're going to be obliged and keep on doing it, you are saying, this is the way I want to be treated. Hell no, you need to take that back. Mm-hmm. Because you are giving out the signal how you want to be treated, and you are going to be treated accordingly. It's the same thing with the students. You know, depending on what you give out, the student's going to treat you accordingly. And then you have the educators that say, oh, this student have no respect. Well, what have you given out? When you got to your lesson, was your class already in your lesson? If your students were already in your lesson, there is no way you would expect to have the class because you've lost them.
Yeah, that's a little bit different between secondary and primary.
Yes.
They don't get in the lesson. They don't get in the lesson unless the educator's there.
That's very true. That's very true. I've had situations, you know, it was a week before the lockdown, and this educator was talking to me. She said to me, oh, I got into the classroom. The students were running riot. I said, okay, well, what time did you get there? She got there late. Why did you get there late? You know, you're on your phone. Because I saw her. I left her in the classroom one of her thinking, really? You cannot afford for your student to get there before you. No way. You know, so all of these things, and then that educator become tired and frustrated, right? Because they've lost the class. But those are situations that we need to start looking at. How are we going to change the, you know, how are we going to change the narrative? We have to start changing the narrative, or else we're going to be constantly burnt out. There's some things we could do for ourselves that we don't get to that space.
Yeah.
It's a vicious circle, and those are all contributing to why educators are not taking care of themselves. They're not looking at the bigger picture. They're not looking at, you are the driver. You are the one in control. Why are you giving your power away to someone else?
Yeah, I can't argue because I took my power back.
Exactly. I like it. You know, it's interesting. I've got a program that I'm writing now, you know, called Educators, You Need to Take Your Power Back. We have to take our power back. And when educators are telling me things, because I coach female educators, and when they're telling me things, oh, well, my head of department, or my the principal this, the principal that, what and how have you contributed to that? You see, the minute you start looking at how you have contributed to it, your whole mindset shifts. But if you keep on saying that you have not contributed to it, there will never be a shift. So those are some of the things in terms of the self-care with female educators, especially female educators, because we wear so many hats and we tend not to take any off. We keep on piling them on.
Yeah, yeah. And I can do it, I can do it, I can do it until it pushes you down.
Exactly. Exactly. The I can do. We need to stop that. No, sorry. It's like I was listening to an educator yesterday. He was doing a program, and it's like everything he was doing, he was talking about, I could identify, we could all identify, because, something I did write in the chat that we need to take our power back. We need to stop the label of being a superhero. We are not superheroes. It is okay not to be superheroes, and we need to stop having this label of being superhero. It become an expectation, and as a result of the expectation, we don't take care of ourselves.
And it is really hard for educators because everybody has good days and bad days.
Of course.
But educators aren't allowed to show their bad days. You've got to be an actor. If you have a cohort, you can walk in and say, guys, I'm having an off day. Especially if they're teenagers. If you've got a built a rapport with them and it's a positive rapport, and you don't have to give them details, just say, something's happened today, I might be a bit off. They will respect that honesty.
Yeah.
It's a bit more different for what I do. What I do is really, you've got to have a good day because you're seeing these kids once. I might see these kids for an hour and a half. And so I've got to be on the ball and put on my game face. I don't really wear makeup, but it's like putting on the makeup, putting on the clown face. This is my clown face. And then just putting it out there. But because I can then decide when I get home to put something aside, or if I am somewhere where I can run home, I run it off. Yeah. People that are in the classroom and are teaching the same cohort all the time, if they haven't got that rapport with their students, then it's really hard to have a down day where you're saying, look, guys, I'm not having a good day. I'm sorry if I get grumpy with you today. But you have to have that trust and that rapport. Otherwise, it doesn't work. I just have to look at it like it's an hour and a half.
Exactly, yes. Opposed to the teacher who've got the whole class, the whole day. Yeah. It's interesting because there's something I'm going to be talking about next week in relationship to people don't understand the things that they take for granted as educator in the classroom. We cannot take it for granted, especially if you teaching, especially you being teacher in the classroom, like going to the toilet. It's a luxury.
Yeah. Oh, tell me about that.
A lot of people don't understand the challenges of, it's like someone was saying, educators have to have really strong bladders. Yes, you do, because especially if you're teaching primary school children, it's like you have to find someone that is passing, to look after your class. And there's sometimes when you do that, when you come back, it's in chaos.
Well, when I go in and teach a workshop, if I'm teaching 3 workshops back to back, so you teach the morning workshop and then during break you reset for the next session before lunch. And then you might run that slightly over if you've negotiated with the teachers so that they can all have the same amount of time. And then you have to move things so that in the dinner hall because they're having dinner, and then you've got to whip them back out. And somewhere in there you're supposed to eat your lunch and have a drink and breathe. And then you have to teach again and pack up everything at the end of the day before the cleaners come in, or there's a club in the room, and pack it in the car. And I could then have to drive 6 hours home. If I don't have a strong bladder, and lots of schools you walk into, it should be the first thing they tell you, the loo's there.
Exactly, isn't it? Exactly.
And they don't, wandering around at lunchtime. I've been there since 8 a.m. because it takes me that long to get everything into the building and get set up. Yeah. I wander around at lunchtime going, where's the loo?
Exactly.
Especially if it's like a Viking day or where I'm dressed up. Yeah. And so you've got all these kids going. Miss?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the kids, little and the adults, they're just like, what?
Exactly, isn't it? That's the whole thing of it. These are things people take for granted, but as educators, it is not. That sometimes from the time you get into the classroom from 8:30, when you have a break at 5 to 11.
Well, see, if I go in for a workshop, that is one of my workshops, one of my Puppy Bee workshops, I'll get to the school at 8.
Yeah.
And then because I've got to reset between classes, or I might be doing a storytelling or something like that, that's through up till 12:30.
That's a long time.
It's a long
Exactly.
time.
Exactly. Because the time this means that you cannot even, there's nothing you could do. You see, and people take these things for granted. They don't realize.
They do.
Yeah, exactly, because the student could ask you in between to go to the toilet, etc. But you cannot ask. There's nobody to cover your class.
No, and in those situations, and even when I'm teaching in a museum, you're a specialist.
Yeah.
So if you're a teacher that has a TA in the class, there's an opportunity sometimes, like if you've had break, if you've had duty at break, your TA might say, 5 minutes, I'll get them settled, have a drink and go to the loo.
Yeah.
As a specialist teacher in what I do, I can't hand those 5 minutes over.
Yeah.
Because the teacher that's there that's doing the behavior control or behavior management, I don't have a lot of problems because they're usually too engaged, but they aren't able to step in and teach what I'm doing because they don't have the specialist knowledge that I'm bringing to that event. That's why I'm there, because I've got specialist knowledge. So that whole go into the loo thing, some days I consider nappies.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, no, serious. Because you see, when you actually see some of this emojis and things, when educators are saying that's something. I actually put things out on various teaching platforms, and in every conversation that come back to me is they love the online platform because they could go to the toilet when they want to, and that should not even be a conversation, but that is something that comes up in the chat, because
isn't that a human right?
Exactly, isn't it? But in the online classroom, this is something you're not able to in the physical classroom. This is something sometimes you have to negotiate.
Yeah.
And these are things people take for granted. But in the education world, we cannot take it for granted because we know how precious those things are. It's sad.
Yeah, and even, in an online classroom, the longest, I guess, an hour and a half, but I can set an activity, and because my loo's 10 steps from where I'm teaching, I can be back in less than a minute.
Exactly.
I can set an online activity, do a screen share so they don't know I'm not there. I've got my earbuds so I can hear them.
Exactly. That's the beauty of, another aspect of online classroom. Whereas when you're in the physical classroom, sometimes, it's like the loo is, God knows how far it is from your classroom. And you cannot go anywhere because you have nobody to look after your classroom.
Well, it could be a couple of, up and down stairs, especially those Victorian London schools.
Yeah.
Which I've been lost in a few of them.
You tell me about it. There's one in St. Pancras. I had that same challenge. I think, I have, even when you have a break, you have 15 minutes break. When you have to prepare a piece of lesson, it's not realistic.
No.
There's so many challenges.
So many. And that, bring down to the thing kids love, because kids love talking about going to the loo, blood, mucus, all that kind of stuff. We're all there. It's all basics.
Yeah, it is true. It is true. And people don't realize that these things that they take for granted for us educators, it's a luxury sometimes.
Yeah.
We are not complaining. We're just saying that some things are luxury and some things are a must.
So some things that people take for granted in other roles.
Yeah.
That freedom to have a drink when they want, like have a cup of coffee when they want.
Yeah.
You know, I go into schools and they have different policies. I've got a lidded cup. Most schools will let me carry my lidded cup around because it's sealed.
Okay.
But my lidded cup is so sealed that I then get to break time and go to have a sip and can't because it's still too hot.
Exactly, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, you know, but some schools say no, so you put it away and you don't have it.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, those risks for your voice, because in a regular classroom, if you're doing a regular lesson, you have quiet times when it's not the adult talking.
Mm,
On the online platform, I built in some quiet times. When I'm doing specialist teaching, I'm usually talking the whole time. I might be talking to a small group of children. I might be delivering to the whole class. But, you know, if I'm doing a prehistory workshop, I start off with a whole class delivery and then break into groups where I teach 5 different groups how to spin in 10 minutes each.
Okay.
So I'm talking to, you know, 6 children, but I'm talking to a different 6 children constantly.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And so then after an hour and a half, you really need a drink.
Exactly, yeah. Because you see, you've just been talking for so long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I come home and I enjoy the silence.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, teaching is interesting. You know, when you're actually moving it from the brick and mortar to the online platform, I personally feel there have been so many advantages on the online platform. You know, one of the things is that actually taught us is we have to think outside the box, quite a big way outside the box. And we also have to always
stomp on that box.
Yeah, it is true. It is true. It is very true. Yeah, exactly, exactly. And you also have to be thinking engagement, innovation, you know, those what you call, because you see, you don't want to lose your students. So that's what you're constantly thinking about. So actually, plus, it also means that we are actually teaching. We actually preparing. You're constantly preparing. It's a lot more preparation.
Yeah, a lot more preparation.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, it's that the online platform is a lot more preparation, and it will be interesting to see when we go back to the physical classroom what we are going to take from the online platform, because there's a lot, I do feel there's a lot we've gained from the online platform to take into the classroom. Although it's been challenging, although it's been, you know, we have to be extremely innovative, etc. But there's a lot we need to be grateful for, because it have actually given us a lot of new skills we would not, you know, normally get.
Yeah.
You know, have you got anything else you want to say to us?
No, I think I'm pretty good. We might have run over your time.
Right. You know, what I am going to just pull it together. Oh yeah, have you got any tips? Have you got any tips in relationship to the online platform? Anybody that is doing workshops and have to use the online platform, have you got any tips for them?
I think, yeah, they need to be not thinking in the lecture format. If you're doing a live workshop, then you're not just lecturing it. You've got to have the students maybe even thinking, you know, what is this? Do you have something at home that you could use like this? Go and find something. Send them on a treasure hunt. I'm giving you a timer. I use timers, like on a PowerPoint, have a wheel that goes down so that they're coming back, but they're not just sitting at a screen all day, because I don't know about you, my eyes get sore. And
yeah, my back gets tired.
Your back gets tired. And it's the same for our pupils. So we have to engage them in a way that keeps them active learners, not just passive learners, and do our utmost to use all of those different learning styles. They can't touch something, but they can think about it in a different way. It doesn't just have to be an oral learner. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. And in terms of, in terms of visualization, need to be actually very, active in terms of you visualize what you think is going to feel like, so it's like actually getting them to, to also think outside the box, because as you say, they can no longer touch these things. They just
No.
have to imagine what it feels like. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. Okay, so basically, it's just bringing it together to demonstrate that in terms of the online platform, you could teach anything on the online platform. Workshops, whatever you used to do in the classroom, if you're a workshop leader, yes, you could do it on screen, but you just need to be stamping, as Vanessa says, stamping on the box, not only think outside the box, stamp on the box,
Throw it away.
and be very creative. Sorry?
Throw that box away.
Exactly. Yes, you have to throw the box away and be very, 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 very creative. It's like I have educators say, "Oh, but I'm not artistic. I'm not creative." You have to be. You have to find that creative spark on you. We all have a creative, some creative spark in us. We just have to dig very, very deep to find it. You have no choice because you do not want to lose your learner. You need to keep them engaged. You need to be innovative because you don't want them to be sleeping on your lessons. You don't want them to zone out. So you have to find some creative ways in order to make your lesson creative. So there are no options.
The learner has to play an active role in the online learning.
Yes, very much so, because it is not only up to the educator. The educator have to bring tools, but the learner also have to be ready to, receptive in all of that, and also bring some ideas.
Yeah.
Because in terms of, you can no longer sit there being a passive recipient. You have to be an active participant. And that's something we constantly need to remember.
For what I do, I just can't hand out worksheets. It won't work.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. And I do feel that educators need to be thinking a lot more like this, because when you go back into the physical classroom, there's no way we're going to be just slamming up, a PowerPoint or no worksheet. The students are not going to stand for it anyway, because, they're being on online platform where they had to be, interactive.
hopefully.
Exactly. We hope.
We hope.
Right. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening to another conversation with me and my female educator on the Female Educators Roundtable platform. I do encourage you to comment, share, and like. If there are any questions that you pose, I will respond to the questions. If there's anything you want to find out from us in relationship to parents, how you could actually best help your children, etc. It's a bit late for that, but we could still, drop me a PM, etc. We could still find ways of supporting you. I'll be online tomorrow with another female educator from around the world who would be in conversation with me regarding teaching on the online platform and sharing some of the challenges and triumphs. Yes, there are challenges, but there are a lot of triumphs as well. And there are lots of takeaway. We need to be honest with ourselves as educators. As much as we think there's so many challenges, there are also so many triumphs if we actually be honest with ourselves. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Have a fantastic afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are. Stay blessed and look after yourself. And remember, take care of you. Bye-bye.